really seek the kind of involvement with these people through which the manifestations like those came through the apostles could flow. Did you hear Wayne yesterday? All these hands texts. Hands, 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 hands. Where were Martin Lloyd-Jones' hands? They were in his books almost all the time. Not on his people, I think. And you know, when you stand before a couple thousand people, and especially if you stand before ordinary common people, and you deliver with articulate forcefulness overwhelming and austere cautions about charismatic excesses, I mean, you've just about ended it. Because they're just people. If you come across the way he comes across in this book, the people are going to be just so scared of taking a wrong step that the verbalized institutionalization of caution is going to hold them in bondage, it seems to me. Ordinary people, here's a quote, ordinary people interpret long, complex warnings and cautions as a red light on experience. Now, I'm not saying you can't give cautions. I'm just saying when they're long, forceful, complex, repeated, it has a quenching effect, it seems to me. Number 3, his grandson, Christopher Catherwood, says, quote, he had a special dislike for certain kinds of emotive music. I wonder what he meant. Was it old kind of frothy, subjective hymns, or was it more contemporary things coming out of the young, charismatic movement? I'm not sure. Some of you may have experience to know. But it disturbs the attitude with which he speaks of such things bothers me. Listen to this. The Spirit does not need our help with all our singing and all our preliminaries. And I don't know if you would have said it with that kind of snide tone, but I just listened to him just a little while this morning so that I could just hear him again. I mean, let me read it without that, and you just supply the attitude. The Holy Spirit does not need our help with all our singing and all our preliminaries and working up of emotions. If the Spirit is the Lord, and He is, He does not need these helps. And anything that tries to help the Spirit to produce a result is a contradiction of New Testament teaching. Now, what effect is that going to have on the young pastors who are listening to him? They'll get rid of their organs. They'll get rid of their choirs. So you have a tiny little Reformed Baptist movement in this country of about 24 dead musicless churches. Because they're so afraid that if you use an instrument or a choir or have a worship leader, well, Lloyd-Jones warns in this book about worship leaders, Dean. They take over. If you communicate that year after year, how can you live out your principles? I mean, I found this, see if you think this is an inconsistency. In preaching and preachers, in talking about pastors how to keep their heart alive to God and open to the Spirit, he commends reading. Read church history. Read biographies. I read that and I say, wait a minute. What's this helping the Holy Spirit business? How come you get off with this reading stuff and don't like music? You know why? Personality. Pure and simple. He was a scholar. He was limited by his own self, as I am and you are. Was a great man, but very limited, I think. I ask, could not music be in the same category as the reading of a good book, which Lloyd Jones says is perfectly legitimate aid in stirring up the emotions to desire more of the Spirit? Only music would seem to be even more legitimate, I think, since it not only helps stir up holy desire, but also gives vent to true expressions of desire and love. And not only that, music would seem to have more biblical warrant as an aid in seeking, or at least just as much an aid in seeking the fullness of God in worship, Ephesians 5:19 and Psalms everywhere. So I just wonder, that's my third point, was his negative attitude on preliminaries? Ooh, we hate that word at Bethlehem. And the vineyard hates it, I think, because those first 30 minutes are crucial. And yet today, the standard criticism at this church and others is it's just a kind of Eastern mystical workup. Number 4, he seemed not to be willing to be involved in the nitty-gritty of cultivating a prayer movement. This is risky now. I don't have much to go on, but Ian Murray quotes him in 1959. Some of his people were getting really excited about revival because he's preaching on it. And they got so excited, it was too excited for Lloyd Jones, and they wanted to start some all-night prayer meetings. And here's the quote from Ian Murray. A few in 1959 were so absorbed with revival that they organized all-night prayer meetings and looked to Martin Lloyd Jones for support. They did not get it. Close quote. I mean, I read that and I said, Murray, you write like that's a compliment. Now, it may be that these were off-the-wall people and I'm not being fair. I don't know. But he didn't say much to counterbalance it. You know, if I wrote a biography of a man and he said, I'm not going to support your all-night prayer meetings, I'd have to add a sentence and say, he did pray. Especially when the bottom line for him in seeking the Holy Spirit was extended, persevering prayer. It's just another evidence that this man had a style of life and he wasn't going to be interrupted. He had sermons to preach and books to write and lectures to give. He couldn't get down with the people. It would take too much time. Number 5. Did he ever come to terms, this is my last one, did he ever come to terms with 1 Corinthians 14:1? Make love your aim, earnestly desire spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. And he did interpret prophecy basically the same way Wayne does. He gives examples from the Scottish Covenanters like Alexander Peden, one of yours, of people who prophesied things that were yet to come. He believed in the gift of prophecy, theoretically, at least. Here's the quote. It is always right to seek the fullness of the Spirit. We are exhorted to do so, but the gifts of the Spirit are to be left in the hands of the Holy Spirit Himself. And I say, Martin, how do you make that square with 1 Corinthians 14:1? That is not what the text says. The text says, earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, not just the fullness that may or may not bring the spiritual gifts. You've missed it. You did not own up to that verse. Was he quenching the Holy Spirit with that attitude towards spiritual gifts? Listen to this quote. We must not seek phenomena and strange experiences. What we must seek is the manifestation of God's glory and His power and His might. We must leave it to God in His sovereign wisdom to decide whether to grant these occasional concomitants or not. Now, surely He's right in the sense that we ought not to be preoccupied with the form of things, like healing the body rather than the transformation of the soul for everlasting life. Surely He's right about that. We ought not to be preoccupied with the externals and with the phenomena. But, I ask you, could Peter and Paul and Philip and Stephen